Ladies and gentlemen, this is the program on constitutional government, and our guest today is Rebecca Goldstein. And she's going to... Ladies and gentlemen? Oh, women. Men and women. That's just a correction from my wife. All right, so our guest today is Rebecca Goldstein, who's going to talk on the subject of her book, her latest book, Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. And she's been a teacher at Columbia and Princeton. She graduated from Barnard College and got her PhD in philosophy from Princeton, but she's a thinker and a writer, and has made her life a leisurely one, if I can say. But she likes to, yes. But she does a lot of moving around and lecturing. She's got a, no, this is a recognized genius that we have with us today, and she's a novelist as well as a writer of books on philosophy. Most recent novel is 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction. So you had to specify what it was. That's good. And Incompleteness, the Proof and Paradox of Kurt Gödel. And Betraying Spinoza, the Renegade Jew who gave us Modernity. So these are all excellent books, and that isn't all of them either. But her latest is on Plato at the Googleplex. And Rebecca, maybe you could let us...
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Let us in on it.
Yeah. I do actually still continue to teach philosophy at the New College of the Humanities in London. So I've always want to be teaching philosophy. Okay, so this book. First thing I want to say is I'm not a Plato scholar, and my interest in... I started out actually in physics. I had some questions about quantum mechanics, and I was a senior in college. I had already applied to PhD programs in physics. I was taking this course on quantum mechanics, and I kept asking my professor questions. And in those days, there were certain kind of questions you were not allowed to ask, like, what does this mean? It was how do these computations connect up with a world which is recognizably our own? And basically the answer one would get is shut up and calculate. And finally, my professor said, why don't you go speak to the philosophers? They ask these kinds of meaningless questions. So I wandered over, I was at Columbia, I wandered over, I asked people whom should I speak with? And they said, go speak to Sidney Morgenbesser. Did you know Sidney Morgenbesser? Oh, Sidney. Sidney he was an amazing man. There's a biography right now that's being written by him by Jamie Ryerson, an editor at the New York Times. And he was pretty much the Socrates of our day. He had exactly the same publishing record as Socrates. He didn't publish. And, but he was a brilliant conversationalist. And the funniest man. He was Socrates with a Yiddish accent. Many famous jokes. And anyway, he was the man I went to see, and we spoke for 6 hours. And he said, I think you're a philosopher. I don't think you are. Your interest seems to be in philosophy, not in physics. So anyway, that I blame Sidney for my move to philosophy. I've always been interested in the meta questions of philosophy. Since I came from a scientific background, and I was convinced that there were certain questions that were facing physicists, interpretation of quantum mechanics, the irreconcilability of quantum mechanics and relativity theory, that were philosophical, epistemological, metaphysical, that I've always been interested in the way in which science keeps trying to swallow up philosophy and can't. I'm very much committed to that. That science will never be able to swallow up philosophy, although, I mean, most of my scientific friends believe that it can. It reminds me of a certain state in the Mideast that never can stop arguing for its right to exist. That's what philosophy is in academia. It is always arguing for its right to exist. There's religion on one side saying that it takes care of the normative questions, the ethical questions, and there's science on the other side saying it discovers the nature of reality, it takes care of ontology, and between them would squeeze out the existence of philosophy. And so that's really was the motivation of this book, and it really begins with some scientists' attack on philosophy. I pick on particularly Lawrence Krauss, who is a cosmologist, a physicist who wrote a book called something like, Why Is There Something Rather Than Nothing, and claimed that that science had now answered this deep metaphysical question. And he had interesting things to say about quantum field theory and why it abhors stability and how that brings certain things into existence. But he wasn't addressing that question, the question that philosophers are addressing. So that was really my motivation here. But the other thing I wanted to do in the book is go back to ancient Greece and to this question of why did they do it, the ancient Greeks? Why did they do so much, right? Philosophy, the beginnings of the empirical sciences, abstract mathematics, the notion of a proof, making it into a theoretical field, not just a practical field. History, real study of history, Herodotus, right? I mean, instead of just chronicles, the real study of history through Herodotus and Thucydides. Not to speak of democracy, and not in our form, as everybody in this room could tell you, but democracy and timeless art. Great art and architecture and sculpture and tragic and also comic plays that are still alive. That's amazing that they did all this. But I was particularly interested, because I'm interested in these meta questions of philosophy, as to why they discovered this way of approaching normative questions. And the thing that also made me very, very interested, I've gotten quite involved recently. I got kind of swept into it. I don't think it was a free choice, into what I call organized non-religion, sort of the secular movement. It was because I wrote a book on Spinoza, and then suddenly I was the poster child for, and he's the patron saint of secularists. So I'm sort of interested in religion and the emergence of religion, and the fact, as it was first pointed out by Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher, that all of the religious traditions that are extant today, that persist to our day, as well as secular philosophy, emerged in roughly the same time period. He called it the axial age. Because they sort of reach out like the axials of a wheel into our age. They still persist. So, Confucianism and Taoism and Jainism and Buddhism and Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, what am I leaving? And the Abrahamic religion and its various offshoots, and probably more, and secular philosophy. The Buddha, Confucius, the prophet Ezekiel, and Pythagoras were all contemporaries of each other. So this is an extraordinarily normatively explosive age, right? I compare it to the Cambrian explosion, 575 million years ago, that gave us all the phyla that now exists, all body types that now exist. What happened in a large section of the world, from China to India, Persia, into Europe, ancient Greeks, across the Mediterranean, into the Judean hills, was a huge interest, big thinking about this, what is life about? And that the answers were vital enough and touched something, deep enough, existentially still alive, that all of us, no matter where we place ourselves normatively, religious or secular, can trace our beginnings back to this period, to between 800 and 200 BCE. That's really interesting. So I'm very interested in this question, which social scientists of the last about 10 or 15 years have begun to take up. And why did this happen in such large sections of the world? So there's that, and I could talk a little bit about the ideas that they've come up with and why I think that they are insufficient, because they can only deal with the kind of measurable things that the social scientists are interested in, and not the kind of existential issues that I'm more interested in. There's that issue of why there was this normative ferment. But particularly of interest to me is, why did the Greeks, who had a culture that was saturated with religious rituals, all right, everything you did, you had a ritual, why did they not approach this existential question, the question of basically what can we do to make our lives matter? It's what I call the will to matter that emerged. Why did they approach this question secularly? And interestingly, before Plato and Socrates and Plato came on the scene, the Greeks already had a value system that was completely secular when it came to this existential question. What can we do in order to make our lives matter? That is just as present as those gods were in their lives. When it came to this question, they didn't bring the gods into the discussion. And it's basically what I call the ethos of the extraordinary. What you had to, the thing you were after was kleos. Was sort of that's an ancient word. It's an ancient Homeric word. It comes from the Greek. My Greek, by the way, is like I knew a little bit as a graduate student. It's gone now, so do not come at me with Greek. But I know enough to know
You're
kleos.
pretty safe.
What?
You're pretty
Okay,
safe.
all right. Well, in that case, my Greek is superb. Right? But kleos comes actually from the root. It means I hear. And it means, to have your name on many people's lips, to have your story told. If it's a good enough story, to have it told by the poets, which was their most effective social media, right? To be sung by the poets. And this was a kind of secular immortality, and they're so articulate about it. They're so articulate about everything, unlike the Hebrews, right? They really give you the existential angst behind it. And it's no surprise that they come up with not just secular reason, but also tragedy, because they have a very tragic view of life. It is this notion, and as I say, it predates what we think of as the classical age, what we celebrate the Greeks for. It goes all the way back to the Homeric age, and the real representative of this ethos of the extraordinary, and it really shows you how out there it was, is Achilles, who's acknowledged into the classical age. I mean, Socrates makes reference to him in the Apology as the best of the Greeks, as the most heroic of the legendary heroes. Why? I mean, he's such a schmuck, right? You read that he's pouting away there. He's certainly not thinking of the greatest good of the greatest number when he's in the Iliad. But he's given the choice, right? My goddess mother tells me, Thetis of the glistening feet, that if I stay here and fight, my life will be short, but I will have kleos. I will be extraordinary. I will live on. If I go to the homeland that I love, I will have an ordinary life, but I will live long. And he agonizes over this. This is the great agony of the Iliad. And and finally he makes the choice. He deliberately, intuitively, and knowingly makes this choice, intentionally makes the choice of the short but extraordinary life. And of course he does win kleos, right? The Iliad is also called the Song of Achilles, right? He is sung. So this kind of, I think that this was a This was a way of living on. I mean, of course, the sad truth, and it was as true in ancient Greece as it is in our day, that most of us are not extraordinary. By definition, most of us are perfectly ordinary. The exceptional is an exception, right? And so there were ways of going about, there was a participatory exceptionalism, right? You were, simply to be Greek was already to be exceptional, to be among the best people. The barbarians were those who spoke non-Greek, you all know, because the two Greek heirs, non-Greek just sounded like so much bar, which is ancient Greek for blah, blah, blah. And so, this is where we get our word barbarian. But also the different city-states, and there were, at its height, 1,006 city-states, had their own form of exceptionalism, and particularly Athens, right? To participate in Athens was to participate in something, extraordinary. And so there was this kind of participatory extraordinaries. I believe Socrates attacked that. He went after the values, those values that he was a Greek, and he therefore bought into the premise that you have to do something, you have to be something to achieve mattering. We are not born into mattering. But what his argument was with his culture was there's no participatory exceptionalism. It's an individual thing. And it's not kleos. It's not a claim. It is, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's knowledge and it's justice. It's what you do with your own point of view, not what kind of impression you make on other points of view. And since he made this argument he was brought to trial, 399 BCE, was after Athens had already been defeated by Sparta. It was hurting. It was okay to tolerate a man like Socrates making these arguments before, but at this point they really had to regain their notion of exceptionalism, and they did. I found very interesting writing by various rhetoricians arguing that, look, anybody can do defeat, but nobody can do defeat like we Athenians are doing defeat, right? We, the amnesty which was very, very wise, the amnesty that they granted to everybody to bring the city together again. In any case, so this is, but Plato and Aristotle still did believe that we have to do something to achieve mattering. They were still Greeks to that extent. I would argue with them. I think that I think human life matters, and that we don't actually have to achieve this mattering. And I actually think that idea that does not exist, individual mattering in and of itself doesn't exist in the ancient Greek world. Aristotle doesn't have it either. I don't think it emerges until the Enlightenment, until after the long religious period, that when Christianity had sway over most of Europe, and that when ancient Greek thinking was discovered again, it wasn't that the thread had been broken and it was taken up exactly as the Greeks had left it off. Something new was added here, a different notion of morality, whether you're a Kantian or utilitarian, the notion of individuals. That mattering is not unequally distributed. Anyway, I'm interested in that. The other thing I'm interested in, I've spoken about it a great deal, is, or spoken around it, is why did this normative ferment emerge then? Some things have been pointed out. First of all, it was all in city-states. It was all in highly organized urban centers. There was a cosmopolitan mix of people. The anarchist anthropologist David Graeber, in his book Debt: The First 500 Years. Have anybody read this book? Yeah. He points out that all of the areas had coinage, and they had a military, and they had slaves. And he calls it actually the military coinage slavery complex. You had the military, you conquered people, you turned them into slaves, who minted the metal that was turned into coins. and that he thinks that this is very, very central for the emergence of these normative questions. Other people, what is he? I think he's a psychologist of religion, Pascal Boyer, has been working recently on the axial age and what he calls big gods, why the big gods emerged then. And he thinks it's simply a matter of the caloric intake. It was a high enough standard of living. And he has the data to show that, all of the areas that participated in, it's wonderful because it's all measurable, all of the areas that participated in the axial age had high standards of living. I mean, this could be true, that when, taking care of just your basic survival needs doesn't occupy you 24/7, then these higher order anxieties can emerge, like, do I matter? So many have come before me, right? Their lives were as filled as mine with love and hate and longing and winning and losing and all the drama that I, as a novelist, am interested in. And they died, and we don't know anything about them. They haven't left a trace behind them, right? We don't even know their name. The same thing, of course, will happen to the great majority of us. What can I do? What can I achieve in order to matter? And I think that's still the question, that is roiling beneath religion. And I'll just say with one little anecdote here. When I came out, as I come from a very religious background, and when I came out as a rip-roaring atheist, I got all of these letters emails from people saying, but why do you want to continue to live? What gets you up in the morning? I kept getting that question. What gets you out of bed in the morning? And I was like, what are they talking about? I have so much to do. Of course I'm going to get out of bed. There's never enough hours in the day. And then it finally, it sort of came together, this sort of thing of what makes you feel as if you matter. And for a very long time, the Abrahamic religions have held sway over our sense of mattering, and it is a very strong guarantor of mattering. It's cosmic mattering, even if it's terrifying. Look, it's the high holidays. I didn't even realize I just said, but these are the days of awe. In my old life, I would be trembling, remembering every single sin. And it mattered, if I had taken a nibble out of Hostess Twinkies, right, didn't have the proper rabbinical imprimatur, God would remember, right? The Lord of the hosts would take note that I had nibbled on a Hostess Twinkie. And this is terrifying, clearly, but I mean, you never doubt for a moment that you really matter. I think it's interesting. I think that we are now, the Greeks they approached this question in a secular vein. They came up with a lot. They came up with philosophy. I think philosophy has made a lot of progress in these normative areas. I think the religious contribution has been important. It hasn't only been secular philosophy. As I said, it's the idea of the individual mattering emerges after the Middle Ages. And I think, but for a very long time, this will to matter has been, it's been satisfied, and we've looked to cosmic mattering. And now, more and more, we're post monotheistic, I think. And what is interesting to me, and what I wrote about in that little piece, is that we seem to be going back, not to the philosophy, the philosophical ideas that were proposed by the Greeks. The way to make ourselves matter is through knowledge and through justice, through perfecting our own moral point of view. But kleos, or clout, there is this, I don't know if I mentioned it, but there is this thing online. It's clout, KLOUT.com, and you can go on and get your clout score. What is your social influence? How many Twitter followers do you have, and how many Facebook followers, and how many retweets of your tweets, and all of these sorts of things. And it's a kind of, going back, there's something very interesting now that the religious answer is declining, that we're going back to a kind of class or clout, but we don't even have to be extraordinary. Our extraordinary technology does it for us, and so a kind of very shallow kind of extraordinary. Yeah, I'll end on that positive note.
That's good. Question over here.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's an incredibly good question. And you can't, as Krauss did, you can't presume the laws of nature in answering this question. You can't presume the laws of quantum field theory, right?
Because they're quantum fields, basically.
Yes, right, because they're quantum fields and they dislike instability, and so they will stabilize. Why are there laws of nature? Why these particular laws of nature, right? That's all part of the question. There are, I tend to like Spinoza's answer, as did Einstein. Spinoza was Einstein's favorite philosopher. He wrote him a love poem, a very bad love poem. How much do I love this noble man, more than words can ever say. It's in German. We can give it to you. It's just as bad in German. Why did Einstein love Spinoza so much? He loved Spinoza's answer to this question, which is that if we knew nature thoroughly, which we can't, we are very, very incomplete. It's lucky we know anything at all. But if we knew nature completely, we would understand. Nature is itself self-explanatory. Nature would explain why it has to have these particular laws and why they had to be realized. I think that this answer actually can be found in Plato, in the Timaeus. That Plato is suggesting something of that sort, that if we knew the laws of nature, they are so beautiful, right? And of course, beauty is still the criterion that physicists use. When you have two empirically adequate theories, you choose the more beautiful one. You go with the beauty, and that means mathematically beautiful. And that's the answer that Plato is hinting at the Timaeus. And that that these laws of nature are just so beautiful. They are distinctly beautiful. They are the unique set in being the most beautiful, and that their beauty forces them into existence and forces everything into existence. I find that I like that answer. It's one possible answer. I like that Einstein liked that answer. I think that's a good like. And but there are secular answers there. I mean, you could just say it's a meaningless question. That's what my physics professors would have said. All meaningful questions presume the laws of nature, and then you get to work on it and to ask this kind of metaphysical question: why these laws of nature? Why anything at all is a metaphysical question? That's possible answer. I don't know if it satisfies anybody. It certainly has never satisfied me. Here we've got this world. The laws of nature are beautiful. Using that as our guidance has really gotten us to someplace amazing. And why? Why is that the case? I think if physics itself can't answer that. Maybe it could. I mean, if we had a complete physical theory. So the group of scientists that I've spoken to about Spinoza, who respond most strongly to it, are always the string theorists, because they've got this very beautiful mathematics. They don't quite know how to attach it to the world, right, empirically, but it's just so beautiful that it's got to be true. It's got to somehow or other be realized. And even Steven Weinberg has said, look, it's got to. It's never in the history of science has there been mathematics this beautiful that didn't turn out to have some sort of application. So I would look in that direction, and that's where my intuition would go. But there are other people's, who have different intuitions, including God, right? Including that there was something outside of nature that chose these laws of nature. To me, that's a cop-out.
Jim?
Hi. I'm puzzled by maybe I misunderstood what you were saying, but by talking about the Greeks as having a secular ideas. First of all, I'm an intellectual historian, so
Yes.
I'm aware that the distinction between the secular and the sacred is extremely recent, like 15th century at the earliest. In the ancient world, the secular was as opposed to the eternal. As this world was temporal as opposed to eternal.
Yeah.
But all of the early philosophers were trying to replace bad concepts of God with good concepts of God. From Thales onwards down to Socrates and Plato, that they all thought the problem wasn't belief in the gods, it was belief in bad gods, substandard gods, unethical gods, and they all believed in the divine. And in terms of, and as for the question, what the meaning of life was for them, what the direction of life, what got them up in the morning, it was to be more like gods.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for ordinary Greeks because they believed in hubris and you couldn't get above
Yeah.
your station and so on.
Yeah.
But but Aristotle and Plato are both very clearly trying to be like the gods. Homoiousis theo is the similarity to the god to the divine is the goal of all ancient philosophy, with possibly of all the dogmatic ancient philosophers.
Yeah.
Not the skeptics, obviously.
Yeah.
So I don't see this as a breakaway from religion. The Axial
Okay.
Age, I've always hated that term because my parents had this set of books by Will and Ariel Durant. I don't know if you remember this, and we were supposed to read it. And it picked up this idea of Jasper's about the
Yeah.
Axial Age, and it
Yeah.
became incredibly sort of mashed potato idea of 8 centuries that were all somehow the same, and I never really found the idea of the Axial Age very, very, very convincing.
Yeah.
It seemed like very different. I think that I liked your way of putting it, that there's what you say, there was a normative
Explosion.
normative explosion. That I like better.
I like it better too.
Yeah, than the Axial Age.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that I think would be worth exploring.
Yeah.
I
Well,
just like, I'm
yeah.
throwing a lot at you, but maybe I have one more comment to make about the normative explosion. I think it has a lot to do with the politics of that time, trying to find justification for rule, other than violence.
Yeah. Clearly, a long discussion would be very nice between us over lunch. But I'll say what I can. I'm quite aware that this is not the way most people would interpret it. That's why it seems to me
Right.
interesting. Maybe secular is not exactly the right term, but it is, in my effort to always relate them to contemporary issues, I use terms like
Yeah.
secular. But it is this idea that that what it is to live the good life, and this is now I'm speaking pre-philosophically, is to live a song-worthy life, a Kleos-worthy life, to have to be known, for one's life to be replicated. There's this amazing scene on the balustrade in the Iliad when Hector and Helen are speaking about all this chaos, the sadness, the tragedy that they've produced, and yet there's a kind of a kind of satisfaction in the sense that they produced a damn good story, right?
Our names will be remembered, yeah.
Yeah, our names will be remembered. I think that our names will be remembered or when Telemachus in the beginning of the Odyssey is lamenting the fact that his father is lost at sea. It's as if he just has disappeared, like a sailor who slips under the waves. And he said, so much better if he had died, and we know where he is. And I think the notion of being slipped under sea, that so resonates for the seafaring Greeks, right? That complete erasure, which I think resonates with us because we all do worry about that. That is, one doesn't have to be much of a philosopher to worry about that kind of complete erasure. That here you are with all of your story, your life, your precious life that matters so much to you. Nobody is going to know about it. I mean, death is that is the terrifying thing about death. And anyway, I think that does have something to do, that whatever the preconditions were that allowed this question to rise to the fore. And I do think that having the anonymity of the large city states, not this intimate little village where everybody knew you, they knew you so well that you had to always be worried about incest, right? They had to keep tabs of kin lines, right? Because you had your place. It's a different thing moving to these big city states. Enough food, a scribe class, all of these things.
But what about
put
courts?
something
What
into
about
place.
courts, though? I mean, Confucianism and Buddhism really
Yeah.
are preserved in courts. It's Ashoka who really preserves Buddhism and makes it the religion of India.
Yeah.
And all of that's done in his court. It's not done in city-states.
Okay, whatever the institutions that allow this to be, to have a life, what I'm most interested in, and it is, what I'm interested in is that these things persist, right? They persist, we still, have allegiance to them one way or another, and they persist because they are responding to something that is deeply human. I know did any of you ever read it was a very big book in the 70s or maybe the 60s, The Denial of Death by Hans Becker, right? I read it when I was in college. I have never reread it, but there are those ideas have something to do with this. I think that this that these normative systems have something to do with our confronting death and why do we even bother to show up for our existence in the first place, for all the difference it makes to the universe, right? And as if we had a choice. And that is something, whatever the preconditions were, whether it was city-states, courts, slavery, coinage, high caloric intake, all of the above, whatever it was that brought those conditions into existence, they allowed this kind of question to emerge, and hence the normative ferment and these amazingly different normative paradigms that persist. The Greeks, I would argue, yes, it was a very religious society, but when it came to this question, what can I do in order to achieve mannering? It was not to attract the attention of those gods. That's the last thing you wanted, right? Something terrible always has the greatest theme in Western art, right? The rape of Persephone, the rape of Semele, the rape of Io, the rape of, right? At the very least, a rape. You never wanted the gods to pay too much attention to you.
It's like the federal government. It's like
not
the
like
IRS.
Jehovah. I'm sorry, missed that?
It's like the IRS.
Exactly. You want to make a lot of money, but not enough to attract the IRS, right? That's it. You want to live big and attract the songs of Pindar, right? Who wrote those wonderful odes for the Epicenian odes for all of the winners. There, you see it in the odes, and two things only make this life worth living. When in the bounty of good health, a man wins both triumph and good fame. And the last lines of that is, seek not to become Zeus, mortal things become a mortal man. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Maybe not secular and religious, but mortal an immortal in terms of the existential question. What do I do to acquire moreness in my life? That's what we all want. We all want to acquire moreness one way or the other.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize,
Yeah.
but I think that the model of the mattering human life, that the idea of having your name survive, it's still modeled on gods. I agree with you, they don't want to be gods, they're afraid of
Yeah.
attracting the attention of gods,
Yeah.
you say. But, their idea of what it would be to be, have a meaningful life is to have my life be more like a god's life.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
That's the metaphor.
Yeah.
I take that really metaphorically, that, how did they imagine their gods? As bigger, faster, smarter, everything. I think of the Greek gods as my older brother and sister. They're better than me, enough so that I want to emulate them, but if I if I get too close and pass them by, they're going to let me know who's superior. I think that's what the Greek gods were like for the Greeks. But in any case, it is a kind of mortal answer, mortal thing. Seek not to become Zeus. Mortal things be. I think that's interesting that they came up with that, as saturated as they were. And of course, Plato talks in terms of the god, reason. To become godlike is to use reason. The more you reason, the more godlike you are. That's just like saying it's a really good thing. That's what the best life
To
is.
be immortal too, though.
Immortal?
Like
No.
the gods too.
I don't believe that the gods were immortal, yeah.
No, Plato, you don't believe Plato thought?
I don't.
believed
I
in
think
the
he tried that out
immortality
in the Phaedo. I think he took it back in the Timaeus. I think, he used that dialogue form. I haven't spoken about that at all. And I write dialogues in this book. That's the expository stuff is alternates with dialogues, and that's actually what got all the attention. It's Plato. I take him to the Googleplex. I put him on Fox News. I give him an fMRI, and he gets into conversation with the neuroscientists about moral agency and personal responsibility, if in fact everything is neural processes. So, that's, but the dialogue form, I think there were many reasons why Plato used the dialogue form. He was very worried about writing philosophy. I think one of the reasons he uses the dialogue form is he tries stuff out and he takes it back. And so I'm very loath to say what is Platonic doctrine. I mean, the theory of forms, he subjects it to attack in the Parmenides. It doesn't occur in the Timaeus or the Laws. And where mathematics is really the key to the intelligibility of the universe. So I think he tries it out in the Phaedo. And it's a very tentative conclusion that Socrates reaches there. Maybe I will survive my death, and maybe I won't, but I won't be around to know if I don't, which sounds a bit like Woody Allen. But yes, well, I accept that the terms secular and religious are not exactly the right terms.
Dustin.
So I had actually two follow-up questions.
Yes.
Which are related. The first one is you've been talking a lot about achieving mattering and moreness at one point.
Yeah.
And I don't think I understand what that means. And one problem, it seems to be that, and you kind of acknowledge this,
Yeah.
your complete erasure poses an obstacle to your mattering.
Yes.
And so what do you mean if not happiness, an immortal happiness by mattering? How can you matter if you're going to die? And the
That's
second
good
question.
enough.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't know. How many people in this room think they matter? Or how many people in this room want to matter, right?
He's in his room.
How many people in this room think their children matter? Or their beloved
my
matters?
children matter.
Of course your children matter.
Matter to
And,
who?
To themselves.
and to you, yes. We are, we want to matter.
But what does it mean?
What does it mean? It means that your life here with all of its means something, that it you're not as nothing. That is, perhaps it
yourself.
means, well, the thing
And
is,
your
I do
friends.
think that it does start with oneself. For example, if you were to mistreat me, my
Mhm.
friend, right? If I were lying on a beach soaking up the rays, and you wanted to get from point A to point B, but my prone body was lying there on the beach, and you simply stepped right on me, because that was the shortest distance between point A and B, I would be very angry. I would think my pain mattered. And I would say, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah.
You just caused me unnecessary pain, for something, for a small benefit to you. I mattered, don't you realize that I matter? Each of us has this. Whenever we feel any moral indignation that somebody has
But
violated
that proves that
our
we
rights.
don't actually matter.
Perhaps,
Because
but
you
we
could
are
be-
committed to our matter. Here's the thing. Here is the thing about philosophy. I don't think, especially normative philosophy, I don't think that it's discovering objective truths the way that science does. I think that what it's trying to do is to increase our coherence, our internal coherence. That if we are committed to certain things, in our actions, if I were to, get very, very angry at you and do some, because you had violated my mattering, my pain mattering, and tell me the person who wouldn't do that, right? That in itself shows I am committed to my mattering. My behavior, my entire life is informed by my mattering, right? That's how
But it's
I make
incoherent.
plans.
You're saying on the one hand you don't matter. So on the one hand you can be violated by a human or by nature. So you don't. But then you
But I
also
don't
said
accept your
you're
claim,
committed
yeah.
to the belief that you do, despite the fact that really you can be violated.
If it is impossible, there are certain places where philosophy has to begin, right? Just like logic, we can't prove everything. We can't prove the law of non-contradiction, right? How are we to prove that if we're not going to presume it? That there are certain things that we have to presume, and that life is incoherent without presuming them. I think that our behavior, each one of us, is incoherent without our commitment to our own mattering. Do I matter in some objective sense, in the way that D equals MC squared is objectively true? Of course I don't in that sort of objective sense. But in order to live a coherent life, I am committed to my mattering. What else follows from that? And I think that is, can there be private mattering? Can I say, like, Wittgenstein argued against the possibility of a private language. Can there be private mattering? Can I say, well, yes, of course, I matter and my behavior is such so that I'm outraged if you don't recognize my mattering, but somehow I'm the only one who does, right? It's just something that belongs to me. Is that coherent? I think philosophers could argue very, very strongly that it's not. So it's a kind of maximizing of coherence. And I think that's how we make can we say that only, white males matter, and nobody else matters? Well, we've said this for a very long time, but the incoherence of that point of view has finally been revealed. And so it's that kind of a certain way of life. This is Wittgensteinian, right, actually. A certain kind of way of life commits you to certain beliefs that you can't justify any other way, but they're imminent in your way of life. I think all of us, it's imminent in our way of life, our commitment to our own mattering. What else follows from that? It's taken us a very long time, and we're still unraveling what else follows from that. But that's the way I would go about it, not in terms of mattering out there.
Chris McClure.
Oh, I just wanted to raise a small historical question that followed up on Professor Hankins' question, and that is, what do you make of the phenomena in ancient Greece of the hero? Because
Yeah.
it seems to me that there were, in fact,
Yeah.
mortal people who did impressive things, and after they died, were worshipped as gods.
Yeah.
That seems to me to really blur the line between
Yes.
these sort of sectors.
Yeah. One of the things that I've pondered in a very loose and not enough research kind of way is, well, why did the Greeks come up with this kind of mortal way, kleos, of justifying, of feeling like they mattered? Is it just that they can't, they had such lousy gods that you didn't want to attract their attention? Why that? And I think that, when I was in Mycenae, and you see these, what they call the Cyclopean architecture, right? This stuff that is still, you can't believe that mortals, constructed these things, the lintel there, that weighed, 1,000 tons or something, I don't know, some phenomenal amount. And you see the beehive graves, this incredible stuff. And so the Greeks for a very long time, during what we used to call the Dark Ages, I think that's not politically correct anymore, the Greek Dark Ages, but I was corrected about that when I used that word at Yale. No, not politically correct. They, everything was anarchy, everything had disappeared. They even their alphabet, they had to import the alphabet from Phoenicia. And there's inscriptions, they can't read it, and they are like walking on the runes of what seem like superhumans. It's just, and it's just, there is that kind of notion, I think, sort of maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being too much of a novelist now, I don't know, but the notion of sort of the possibilities of humans, what they can achieve, that is godlike, and there's almost a continuum between these lowly people who walk among these ruins, can't even read the inscriptions, and their ancestors who probably even bred with the gods, how to explain this otherworldliness. And what's interesting, when I was reading Steve Greenblatt's book, The Swerve, and he talks about the rediscovery of these ancient Greek texts, particularly, what was it, Epicurus, right? And was it Epicurus? No, Lucretius, of course, Lucretius. That they too, they had lived, they walked among ruins of an ancient civilization of Rome, and they had sunk so low, and that there was this sort of notion of the possibilities that their ancestors had realized, and a worship of that, the possibilities that humanity can reach, and then a tremendous ambition that arises, that the Renaissance comes flowering out of that, and classical Greeks comes flowering out of this. Aristotle says something really interesting. I don't know where, maybe it's in the Politics, but he said that after the Greeks defeated the Persians, their ambition knew no bounds, and that it exploded, and he's particularly interested in the way it exploded intellectually, but there is this sort of, after sort of, so maybe there was kind of a hero worship. We're so lowly. Look at what our ancestors were. They must have been, breeding with the gods to be able to do this. So a kind of hero worship, and then, finally, there's this explosion of ambition after the Persian Wars, and I don't know. There are a lot of steps to fill in between, but something sort of happened, and I think, the hero worship, the notion of the hero, the human who can achieve godly proportions, and leave these signs behind them, change the surface of the earth forever, because of they had lived, that this kind of notion of what one can do, either from a very lowly position looking up at them, or then looking, we are the heroes. We can do this. It led, of course, to tremendous problems in ancient Greece. You had to rein in this antinomian individualism, Alcibiades, right? Who kind of, living big. He's Achilles come to life, but what havoc he causes. So, I'm sorry, I'm way too much information, but I do think that the notion of the hero, of course, is central to this.
That there are actually people after the Persian Wars who got the same treatment. Like veracities and Thucydides.
Sure. So that this notion of, but you know, it is a kind of human achievement that matters there, a human achievement that will live on. Our names will be on lips to come, and that is, I think, central there.
I got a question as to equal mattering.
Yes.
Yes. How do you deal with this song from Gilbert and Sullivan? If everybody is somebody, then nobody's anybody. What is that?
Yes.
Yeah, that to
Yes.
matter means to matter more.
To matter more. You know, I think that we have to distinguish two levels of mattering, and that you know, there is the ethical notion of mattering. You know, that if one is committed to one's own mattering and one's children's mattering, not necessarily the people they marry, but our children, right? They do matter. And certainly their children. But if one's committed to that, I digress. If one's, you know, what that kind of normative, ethical, the kind of mattering for which one can give a reason when you feel that your rights are being violated. You know, the kind of, you know, the sort of what would one say that, so to anybody who signs on to the project of reason, would you have something to say to them in order to convince them? There's that kind of mattering. And then there's what I call, I actually had named it, this was in a very early book, and in fact a novel, mattering maps. And this is actually, I discovered quite recently that this has become a term, this mattering maps, and sometimes I'm cited and sometimes I'm not. George Lowenstein, for example, the behavioral economist, had published a piece in Harvard Business School talking about mattering maps and how they explain behavior and why this gives counter evidence to the rational agent model of economic behavior, mattering maps, that this is a sort of subjective thing. It is what matters to us, what are the characteristics that we prize in ourselves, and that gives us our zone of people who matter to us, and you know, and make us feel like we're living a successful life or not. And so, you know, to many of us, I would go so far as to say probably everybody in this room, you know, we kind of prize our intellect, and the people who really matter to us are often, you know, they're not related to us, are people whose intellect we admire, whose writings we admire, you know, and the people, you know, we even look down on people who don't even think so very well and think that they don't quite matter. This is an individually variable aspect of people's psychology. I had a neighbor whose mattering map clearly was all about clothes. I mean, she morally abhorred me for not dressing as she thought I ought to dress. This is a normative kind of, or, you know, beauty or a musical talent or social ability. Here, it's very scattered. It's different zones of mattering. Do any of them matter more than others? You know, I don't know. I think yes. I do. But you know, even within intellectual circles, you know, my science friends think it's only scientific intellect that matters, and you know, my novelist friends think it's only art that matters, and you know, people who don't get art are contemptible. And why don't you find your meaning in life in this or in that? We have a tendency to universalize, right? I think the only thing that should be universalized is on the normative level, on the ethical level, that it's a terrible thing that everybody wants to matter, and it's a sad thing that when people are made to feel that they don't matter at all, and that the social conditions or whatever are such so that they feel that they matter so very much less than others, it causes misery. And so that seems to me bad.
Okay. Pat?
Yes, I want to go back to Achilles and the choice that Achilles made. In the Celtic tradition, there's a very similar situation. The great Celtic hero is someone called Cuchulainn. And when Cuchulainn is probably in his teen years, he wants to train to become a warrior. And the king, who's also his foster father, tells him that if he becomes a warrior, his life will be short, but his name will go on forever. And according to the text, then Cuchulainn says, well, that's an easy choice. And he becomes a warrior, and he ultimately is involved in one battle after another in saving part of Ireland against the invaders, and then he dies at the end. So I guess my question is, are there other Cuchulainns in other traditions?
Yes.
And is this something that's kind of tied up with a warrior culture?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I've only been interested in the Greek culture and religious, the way that the will to matter is realized in religious traditions, and I simply don't know, but I would like to know.
Well, and that's another interesting thing about the Celtic tradition, because similar to the Greeks, I would say that they had a weak set of gods.
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and immoral, right? Were they immoral the way the Greek gods?
They were moral. They were changelings that would come in and play, and play all these tricks on
Yes.
the mortals, and
Fascinating.
so
Yeah.
they were not. There really wasn't a hierarchical set of gods that you would worship. That
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
kind of from a different realm.
Yeah, I mean, it does, it was, what I find very interesting in Greek culture is that it isn't only realized in the warrior. That is, of course, extremely important. But, anything, so to be a Pericles, right, to be a golden-tongued rhetorician, politician, statesman, to be a philosopher, to be a great athlete, and have Pindar create these immortal lines in your honor, to be beautiful, to be so beautiful that you're spoken about, you are on people's lips. So it's certainly the warrior is one way of and an extremely important way of realizing it. And these were citizen armies; everybody had to be a warrior. But it is. But there were other ways that it was realized, and it's really to be extraordinary, one way or the other, and therefore to be. The extraordinary seems to me a means to an end, right? That's the only way you could be spoken about. They didn't have Twitter or Facebook or anything of that sort. The only way that you could root your name abroad would be with the feat, with what you could do, often realized in war. But that's really fascinating to me, and I would love to know if there are other cultures that have this kind of short but extraordinary, long but ordinary. The choice is clear.
Tom?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to follow up on something. You were reticent to say that there was something wrong with the person that we could not even say it's the same person, but let's say there is someone that cares only about clothing. And you were reticent about clothing, right?
Yes.
And it seems to me obvious that there's something wrong with that person. And then you sort of admitted that, but then you made a distinction, and you said, okay, that's stuff that's changeable, or maybe that stuff's changeable or less important, but mattering on the ethical level is the important thing. But it seems to me that if that person really only cares about clothing, or cares about clothing more than other things, there's something morally deficient about that person, and I don't think that person could be happy. And both those two things would seem to me much more important than whether or not they matter, and this vague mattering thing seems to me much less important compared to those two things.
No, I wasn't saying that
Okay.
the way to matter, to really matter, is to matter morally. And Plato would say that, but I wouldn't say that. I would say that everybody matters.
I know, but I understood that, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, if you also see the necessity of distinguishing between morally deficient people and morally better people, and if you also think, and maybe you don't think, but if you also think that a condition of happiness is being morally good or deficient, then maybe they do matter and you should respect them, but that level of their status seems to be relatively unimportant compared to whether or not they are good and, I mean, not saying you could kill these people, not for murder, but the judgment would seem to have to be that there's something wrong with these people and they can't be happy. And that seems to
And
be a
that
much more
matters,
important judgment.
yes.
That's a much more
Yes.
important judgment about them than whether the mere fact that they are a human being.
Yeah. I would say that, it really matters if they're not happy. I don't know that they're not happy.
Okay.
Yeah. Most intellectuals I know, and certainly most artists I know, are miserable. It's a very, very insecure life, right? Certainly, to be a novelist. So that happiness, I don't know. That actually is not my measure, and I think it's an empirical question. That's for something for social scientists to do. Go out and measure different mannering maps. Who's happier, right? I don't know. It's an empirical question. And how much does that matter? If I find out that my neighbor who knows exactly what to wear and when to not wear white after a certain date or something of the sort, and otherwise it's a bad thing, she probably is happier than I am. Yes. She doesn't have to worry about book reviews, right? She knows it all. She knows it all. She's quite happy. Is she living a stunted life? I don't know. I don't know what her capacity is. We're different. Everybody is different. Everybody find their own mattering. What I know is that those who are unhappy, that matters. If they haven't found their own mattering, they haven't found a way, that matters because everybody has the right to flourish, to feel as if they're flourishing. Yes, I do think that certain mattering maps lead to more flourishing. I do think I do think a creative life perhaps leads to more flourishing. You feel like you're making progress to the extent that you look back at former things you wrote and said, how the hell could I have ever written that, right? I mean, I've come so far since that. Does that make me happy? I don't know, but it means I've made some progress, right? Often makes me quite miserable. But I don't know. Happiness is, I really do think that is something, however you measure it, there are people in the psychology department that's their specialty, happiness, Dan Gilbert and such, and they can test this sort of thing. But I don't know. I don't know who's happy and who isn't. Yeah. Anna.
But isn't that also speaking about the Greeks? Wasn't that a very central question to the Greeks? That we skipped over altogether. The question of is there happiness that can be humanly achieved, and so that's very central to the whole approach, and even to where you say we need to start somewhere, and I mean that's an Aristotelian starting point.
Yes.
Human beings long to be happy, and it seems to me that your argument is very self-defeating in that respect, because Dustin pointed it out. I think that you can already know that if you're searching for this kind of mattering that somehow extends beyond yourself, especially if you are a secularist, as you say, that you're not going to achieve that. You're directed towards something that's going to be impossible, and Harvey would say it comes out of your thumos. Probably Plato would say the same thing.
Sure.
Sure. And yeah, but I think if you're interested in this question of, you're separating mattering somehow from happiness, and to me this seems inseparable. And it seems like if you, and especially as a scientist, it's very strange to me that you make philosophy, for instance, or the desire for knowledge come out of some ulterior motive, which is somehow being famous or achieving some glory or being known or something, and not something that you want because you happen to be made that way, that that you love finding things out, that things bother you, that inconsistencies bother you, that and you just like to have answers to certain things, and you like the progress.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you seek that there's an ulterior motive.
Oh, of course not.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've been so unclear. I really
No, maybe I
apologize
am too.
that I've been so unclear. You know, as far as the ancient Greeks go, I separate very much sort of the Homeric, what I call the Homeric, or the pre-philosophical value system of Kleos, of this trying, this impossible striving, you know, it sure got results, right? But an impossible striving kind of for this kind of, you know, fame with, I think that, in fact, Socrates was put on trial for impiety. It's not that he was attacking the Greek gods, he was attacking that value system. And it was exactly that fame doesn't matter. He says this over and over. Your fame doesn't matter. Kleos doesn't matter. It's knowledge and it's justice. It's the virtues. You could die with nobody knowing you, and you have lived the life worth living. It's not the fame. I mean, it's a complete attack on the Kleos-centered value system, and I endorse that. You know, that is clearly not the drive here. Does that make us, does that make us matter in some ultimate sense? I don't know. I mean, as I say, I think everybody finds their own way of mattering. Yeah, that one really works for me, and that one has helped human life flourish. I mean, you can look at it in that term. You know, those for whom knowledge mattered and justice mattered have changed things for the better. And so, you know, that is a kind of also seal of approval of this sort of thing. But no, the motive is not and I'm saying that's exactly where philosophy came out. It shared that Greek ethos of the extraordinary. You have to do something to achieve. Some people matter and some people don't. But what is it to be extraordinary? It is not to, how does that poem go, that Emily Dickinson, you know, I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too? How dreary to be somebody, how public like a frog, to tell one's name the live long June to an admiring bog, right? That's basically what Socrates and Plato are saying to this pre-philosophical notion of what it is to be extraordinary. I mean, who wants one's name told live long June to an admiring bog? So no, that's not, I'm sorry I was so unclear about that. Yes.
Rory and then Judy.
I wonder if I could ask you a question maybe that hopefully speaks to your specific kind of professional experience
Yes.
as a writer, and I don't mean this, I mean this in a positive way, but as a popularizer or writer of more popular or
Yes.
accessible books on
Yes.
highly, traditionally, one would say highly inaccessible topics like
Yes.
Spinoza.
Yes.
Not a good cocktail party starter,
Yes.
that's what I work on.
You work on
Experience
Spinoza?
that
Yes, yes.
people, oh, right. He's like Descartes, that's the most you can get.
Yes.
So your book is helpful in this regard.
Yes.
I wonder though, so in the past 2-3 decades, I'll pick that time frame, do you observe any kind of trackable or distinguishing change in the taste of American, somewhat say middle brow or higher brow readers, you know, maybe just New Yorkers? I mean, I know it's hard to speak of all Americans, but of the sort of Americans that your publishers are sort of aiming your
Yes.
book at.
Yes.
Have their tastes and interests changed? I mean, it's very hard to track these kinds of things. You know, you see a plethora of many new science, you know, because you're
Yes.
specifically talking about science.
Yes.
Millions of scientific
Yes.
studies telling us, you know, red wine is good or bad or all kinds of things.
Yes.
And I read these.
Yes.
Everybody
Yes.
reads them, I think. And I just, one example, and then some part of you think, oh, that's new, but then I think, you know, if I went back to 1960s New York Times, there'd be tons of scientific little discoveries there too, blasted away at the public. So I just wonder, do you observe, are there specific cardinal changes in American high or middle brow readership tastes that indicate something about the culture that you notice as someone who publishes books?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I haven't thought about it a great deal. I mean, I've been very interested in what the scientists have been able to do. You know, Brian Greene string theorists, what was it called, The Elegant Universe, and others, Steven Pinker, right? That these people who have been able to take, to take these scientific ideas and not really water them down too much, somewhat, and make people, they're stars, they're icons. It's amazing, and that's interesting. This kind of iconic status of certain scientists. And I do think it does, again, have something to do with the rise of secularism. Many of these people are also spokespersons for secularism. I think that, there is something of that. It also has a lot to do with a very powerful agent who handles all of them. Philosophers, I don't think, can ever do that. Bertrand Russell did it, and, to some extent, and in some of those books,
They do it in France, for example.
Yeah.
There are famous philosophers in France. They
Yeah.
sell hundreds of thousands of books.
That's right. The
I just
French
wonder
can
what's
do
happening
this.
in America.
Yeah, so I've noticed, I've been very surprised, for example, at how, the Spinoza interest, so you work on Spinoza as well? So, there was that play, The New Jerusalem by David Ives. Did you see it? Oh, you should definitely see it, yes. It's, what's interesting is, Spinoza is on trial in this play, and I saw it in New York, where I was on a panel afterwards, and then they staged it again in DC, and they made an entire huge festival out of this thing. They were packing them in, and this, of course, was a play. But then there were academics. Stephen Adler was there, other people, talking about Spinoza and should he have been excommunicated or not? And then they had the whole theater vote on whether he should be reinstated, right? Whether
It's so good for PR.
it was incredible. And then they read, and they read it, and yes, he should be. The Jews should acknowledge him, which is meaningless, right? Completely meaningless. It was only the community of Amsterdam that did it. It didn't go outside of the confines of Amsterdam. It only lasted as long as his life, and it was a meaningless gesture. But I was so interested that it was made, and then the coup de grace was at the end. They had 3 rabbis come up. Orthodox, conservative, and reform. No, maybe it was conservative, reform, and reconstruction. And read, I guess they had prepared it either way it was going to go, but I think they knew it. And read this formal acknowledgement of, Baruch Spinoza once again. Well, that was incredible. And so what's going, I don't know what's going on, and I have noticed with that Spinoza book, that it sold. My publishers couldn't believe it, how well that book sold. And when I would come to these various, like JCCs or the lines would be, they'd have to turn people away. So Spinoza, you don't know what you're sitting on there, Spinoza. And again, I think maybe it's got something to do with secularism. The physicists also very, very interested in Spinoza. All you have to do is, to talk about how it fits in with string theory. Einstein loved him, all that stuff. But here's the thing. I don't think philosophers will ever be able to do it. It's a little argument I have. Philosophers are always, they're jumped on a lot. And I think actually Plato, once again, has the germs of a very good argument in the Protagoras, the place where he has somebody saying, maybe it's Protagoras or Socrates, I can't remember, that if somebody's a really bad flute player, but he has delusions of being a great flute player, and and he gets up in public all the time and he's playing the flute, people are going to stop him, right? His family is going to say, stop embarrassing yourself. You really can't play the flute. And he's going to go, it'll be okay. He's going to be okay. The kind of things that philosophers deal with. How do you be a rational person? How do you justify your beliefs? Are your beliefs justified? What justifies actions? Are you a good person? What kind of lives ought we to be living? Everybody thinks they're an expert on that, and he says to challenge somebody that they don't know how to think about that is to impugn their humanity. That's part of what it is to be human, is to think. I mean, we all believe, and we all think we have good reasons for belief. We all act. We all think we have good reasons to act. We justify our beliefs to ourselves. We justify our actions to ourselves. That's what it is to be human. We are reason-giving creatures. To impugn somebody and say, no, you don't know how to do that. We're the experts on this. This is our field. We study this. It somehow seems to diminish their humanity. And so that makes being an expert in philosophy a very tricky business. Either you talk to other philosophers, and that has its advantages and disadvantages, or if you think there's really something to give, that you flourished under this, and you would like others to flourish as well from what you've come to perhaps see and justify to yourself, that you want to share it. There is that problem of how to do it. What is the best way to do it without impugning people's humanity? And so it's a very special problem that I think philosophers have. I think people in literature have that problem too. Everybody knows how to read a novel and get something out of it. So people in literature have to come up with theory, right, to make them experts, right? And so, I think, there are certain things that to be human is to be involved in them, and to feel that you have as good a right to interpret as anybody else. And philosophy is certainly one of those things, and that makes it very, very difficult to be a philosopher who wants to talk to people outside of your field. That's always in my mind.
We're reason-giving creatures who get angry. On Judy Swanson.
Well, the shorthand of my question is whether you would venture to say if Plato is a dualist or a monist.
Yeah.
And in particular, if he might be at all impressed with Tom Nagel's presentation of a new and improved monism in his book, Mind and Cosmos,
Yeah.
in which he argues that consciousness goes all the way back or all the way down.
Yeah.
Reason is emergent, but its distinctive capacity is value judging, and that we, human beings, having that reason are an answer to a need in the cosmos for value judging beings.
Yeah. I want to mention that Tom Nagel was actually my dissertation advisor at Princeton. And my dissertation was on the irreducibility of consciousness. So I'm very much on board with the irreducibility of consciousness.
I actually knew that.
Yes.
I was at another event where you said that.
Yes.
So, okay.
But I am, in fact, a monist. I think that that we are matter, but there is far more to matter than our present physics.
But what do you think Plato thinks?
Plato.
Yeah.
I'm very, there are many times when he talks as if he is a dualist. The Timaeus is an interesting, I love that dialogue. It is, I think it gave us mathematical physics. I think, Galileo always referred to Plato as the divine Plato, and it was the Timaeus that he was reading. That was the one dialogue that was read during the age of Aristotelian, literally. And so, that notion of mathematics being the key to the intelligibility of the physical universe, I think is really good. But in the Timaeus, he also seems to, he argues that the mind is the brain, unlike his student Aristotle, right, who located the mind in the heart, right? And he has these arguments for why the mind is the brain, and why it's up there, and how, the demiurge put it up there, and in the spherical thing to sort of imitate the spheres of the universe. And, and some of the arguments are of that nature. Some of them are much better than that. But in any case, he does say that, and he says something that I find just amazing there, which is that he always was committed to nobody willingly doing wrong, right? That seems to go all the way back, maybe even to Socrates, right? That nobody willingly, does wrong because you're hurting yourself by doing wrong. But in the text, he says that, again, nobody willingly does wrong. So if somebody is doing wrong, either it's mental illness, there is something wrong with their brain, and he calls it the marrow in the soft marrow in the head. And he even has, it's connected, he doesn't know about nerves, but it's connected to other marrow inside the bones. He's almost empirical there, right? But if somebody does wrong, either there's something wrong with the marrow in the skull, or it's bad education. And so in either case, the person would not want it to be so. And so punishment is wrong. And it's a very startlingly modern view that, that extreme evil is a mental disease for which people cannot be held accountable because it is actually something physically wrong. He sounds there to me like a monist. But, in other places he sounds very much like a dualist. And in all of the myths, the myth of air, when, the dead soul goes off and sees the afterlife and comes back and tells us, in all of these myths, it sounds like real dualism, but they're myths, put forth in the language. What? So is the Timaeus. Yeah, I know. Of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an argument. That claim that people ought not to be held responsible for extreme evil, because extreme evil entails probably something wrong with the marrow in the skull. That's an argument that is there, and it's continuous with arguments throughout his career, one way or the other, that nobody knowingly does wrong. If we know what is right, and we will do it because it's in our self-interest to do it.
Well, there's no form of evil.
There's no
So
form of evil.
There's no form of evil, so it's
Actually,
compatible
the word-
with dualism.
The word actually, yes, but extreme wrong. When somebody does something which is extremely wrong, evil would not be the right word. Extremely wrong, we would call it evil. They are doing it. I'm answering this in terms of, is he always a dualist? That sounds like a kind of mind-brain identity there. That's just kind of floated by. I don't, I'm very reluctant, as I've said before, to pin any specific doctrines on Plato. Things are tried out, and they come and they go in the dialogues. But that one is really. That's the only place I know, if anybody could tell me another place. It's the only place I know where what sounds like monism, individual monism, seems to be floated and put into an ethical context. What do we hold people responsible for? So that was interesting to me for the very last dialogue that I had done in the dialogues was, as I said, Plato getting an fMRI, which I did. I don't know if any of you know any of these neuroscientists, but there's this guy, Josh Buchholz, and he here at Harvard, and he was really concerned. He doesn't have tenure yet in my husband's department. He's really concerned not to hurt me in any way, right? Not to have me explode in that machine or something. And but he tests what he tests. That's right, exactly. But it really would have hurt the tenure case, whether it was intentional or not. But it would not speak to his competence. And but he actually, he does tests on people in maximum security prisons, people who have committed terrific crimes, I was part of the control group, of course. And thinking about temptation, like how well can you put off temptation? Will you take the $100 and wait 2 weeks, or must you have the $20 right now? And all you're doing is imagining this stuff. And what he has discovered is that people in these high security prisons, they're just flooded with dopamine. They are just, it's as if their prefrontal lobes don't even get into the action. They don't get into the action because you conceive of this pleasure and you just have to have it, and you have to have it now, even if it's not in your self-interest. No discipline whatsoever. The Phaedrus, the two horses with the chariot. That bad horse just has it the whole way, right? The charioteer doesn't even have a chance to exert executive control. That's interesting, and I have Plato talking to Josh Buchholz about free will and personal responsibility and personal agency, knowing what we know about certain kinds of brains. How do we hold them responsible? And I use a lot of the Timaeus in order to, when in these dialogues, as often as I could, I just lifted out things from the dialogues and weave them in. And if I didn't footnote them, you couldn't tell, I think, that they actually come from Plato, because some of him, not all of him, but some of him is so spot on our contemporary debates. For example, this one, that he really has a lot to say about this. So my voice is gone.
Well, Rebecca, that's very good of you. This has been fascinating to hear, and we thank you very much.
Thank you.